The question I'm asked more than any other question is, what drawing materials do I use? When I started drawing, my art practice really was exclusively painting Australian trees and flowers in oil paints. But I started to do some street sketching while I was on a trip to Europe in 2018. I had such a great time. I did much more of it on that trip than I had expected to. And when I got back home to Australia, I wanted to keep drawing. Now, these were pencil drawings, and I just used whatever pencils I could find around the house. But after about a year, I decided I wanted to explore pen and ink drawing. So I had to go and buy some materials. The truth is, I just bought whatever was available in the first art supply shop I went into, took them home, and began to use them. Because I was happy with how they turned out, I kept using them. If you really want to know the particular art materials I use, I'll show you those at the end. But first, I want to give what I think are the two most important answers to what art materials should I use. My first point in what drawing materials to use is a simple one. Use the brands you can afford to buy. Not just afford to buy, but afford to use up and replace. We have to have supplies that we're not afraid to go through, because we can go through a lot of art materials in developing our skills and techniques. If our paper or our pens or our pencils are so expensive to buy that it makes us cautious to use them in case the artwork isn't worthy of the cost of the materials, then they're the wrong materials for us. We have to feel free to splash around, to experiment, if necessary to waste. It is going to be much more advantageous to your skill development to have cheaper materials that you can use all the time continuously than to have more expensive, greater quality ones that you use far less frequently because you either don't want to waste them or have to replace them. Having said that, I would probably still use the best quality ones you can afford to use and to use up and to replace. But before you do, make sure you can tell there's a difference to how your artwork finishes up. A more expensive brand is not necessarily going to help you in your drawing development. My second point is use the same brand and type of materials for all your drawings, because the fastest way to improve is to go deep in one area. We push our skills to a higher level more quickly by staying with the same material and even possibly within the same subject niche. Because higher level skills that we develop by specializing and concentrating with the one lot of materials transfer surprisingly well and easily to other materials if we then later want to try them. But a low level skill level in a wide number of different art materials and subject matters ends up being just that, a low level. I was amazed how much my painting Australian gum trees in oils in large paintings over and over for a number of years helped me so much when I began to draw them with line in ink on paper. Having gone deep in oil paint meant that I had a head start when I switched media and began to draw the same subject in pen in line on paper. Different brands have different qualities. Whether they have a ballpoint tip or a compressed fibre nib makes a huge difference in the sort of line they draw, the sort of quality of line that comes out and the experience of drawing it, as does whether it's water-based or alcohol-based ink, as does the type of pigment that the various brands use. Even the thickness of the barrel of the pen and the way it's put together can change the drawing experience. And if what we're after is a comfortable pen where we can predict the sort of line that's going to come out of it according to the way we draw it, then changing all these factors constantly makes it so much harder to do that. Because every time we change our pen, we're changing all of these variables and quite possibly we're not even aware we're doing it. Sometimes when we think a drawing's turned out more easily, it may simply be that we've used a better type of pen for our style, technique and expectations. In a moment when I show you the materials that I use, I'll show you a couple of different pens that are different brands, types and inks, and I'll explain how and why I use them for different purposes. So what materials do I use when I do these drawings for my YouTube videos and other artwork? For the line work in my drawings, I use Copic multi-liners. They're a waterproof pigment ink. I might use these reusable forms where you can replace the nib and also the ink cartridge inside, or I might use the disposable versions. I also use Copic sketch markers. These come with a chisel and a brush end, although I exclusively use the brush end. I use the neutral grey colour, which comes in a range of 11 shades. Can I point out that at this point, at least anyway, I'm not sponsored by Copic in any way, and I'm receiving no advantage in telling you that this is the pen I use. Copic happened to be the first brand I bought when I walked into an art supply shop, and I thought they worked well for me, so I kept buying them. Certainly in Australia, they're not one of the cheaper brands, but I do like the fact they can be refilled, especially with the sketch markers. The other pen I use though is a Mitsubishi Uniball I, both the fine and the micro. Whereas the Copic is, I presume, some sort of compressed fibre nib that the ink moves through, the Mitsubishi Uniball actually has a ballpoint. What that means is that the ink flows very quickly, very easily, and in greater quantities through the pen. It leaves a very nice, very black line very easily. I often use these in tutorials where I want to draw diagrams quickly and easily, simple diagrams, because I get a nice black line. The ink, however, because it flows out more quickly, deposits in greater quantities on the page, and therefore does take longer to dry. So I need to make sure I don't bring my hand over it too quickly. For paper, I use an Australian brand, Artec, which is a drawing cartridge paper, which is suitable for wet media as well as all dry media. It's a 210 GSM acid-free paper. It's actually a German paper, which is imported into Australia and made into pads of various sizes. I usually use the A3 size, which I cut down if I want an A4 sheet. I like the thickness, I like the surface, which is smooth enough that I don't feel my pens get caught in the surface texture, but which has a little bit of variation in it, which I think helps me apply the tone and also creates a pleasing effect.